Hey kids, let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, many centuries back, there was a village, deep within the Roman Empire. It was small in scale, but its name brought tales and legends far and wide. The small and humble village of Pompeii found itself sitting next to a tall, intimidating volcano, far in the distance, so grand and ominous its name struck fear in even the bravest of souls. Mount Vesuvius. Day after day, its prestigious stature loomed above the citizens of Pompeii, and even despite its stoic demeanor, the villagers couldn't help the feeling that something about it was sinister. Something was just not right. But on one fateful hour of a fateful day, the villagers were going about the hustles and bustles of life, doing whatever they did in the Roman Empire back then, blissfully unaware that today would be their last. Out of what felt like nowhere, the ground began to shake. The sky thickened with smoke as an eruption, the power of a million storms, blasted hot molten lava into the air, brighter than the eye of Apollo and warmer than the gaze of Vulcan. The wrath of Mount Vesuvius had awoken. From that day on, Pompeii would be talked about in mere fables, as its streets were buried beneath its ashen grave. Not a single soul would cry in fear, ever again. Fast forward a few thousand years, this idiot called Madeline Celeste, from the indie game Celeste 2018, decides to climb it. Hell yeah. Good morning. Sometime back I cleared the map Mount Vesuvius by Yoshichobi 7, a volcanic-themed Chapter 7 style summit map. And it's a low 1-star map on the hard list, which means it probably needs some time and effort to beat. Now I don't ever really record myself clearing 1-star maps because you don't need any video proof for the list, so I often find it more convenient to play them off camera in my own time. But for a lot of the maps I enjoyed, I do want to at least make something covering them here, so I present you this awesome Mount Vesuvius review. I might make more hardlist reviews like this in the future, possibly maybe, serving as a way of providing recommendations for players who want to improve and push their skills further, but I don't know. Okay, let's get into this map then. Mount Vesuvius follows the same structure as Summit from the base game, with it being divided into 7 checkpoints for each chapter of the game, and even a bonus secret checkpoint at the end. This time, the summit is completely reimagined as a volcano, with a bit of artistic hyperbole to emphasize that it is such. Not that it's a bad thing, because I'd say the hot, fiery volcano theme is executed really well with the visuals. Most tilesets you see are recolored variations of the vanilla game tilesets, which draws the map back to the original summit. Even with how diverse the summit is, having to stand for 7 distinct chapters, the theming throughout the whole map was strong and consistent all the way. So I don't have really any gripes with the visuals of the map. I think they're really well done and coherent throughout the entire thing. As for gameplay, it doesn't start off as anything particularly special, being around advanced difficulty. Checkpoint 1 / the 0 meter section has dream blocks as its defining gimmick, which doesn't make that much sense for 0 meters, but it does kind of work out in the end when you get to 1000 meters. And I'm not one to complain about dream blocks, especially when they are 2 special types of modified dream blocks, these green ones which let you redirect your trajectory by dashing inside of them, and these swirly curly ones where you have full control of your movement while inside, kinda like a feather. Oh, and 3 refill crystals too. There are berries in this map, 22 to be exact, but I ended up skipping all of them during my first playthrough, up until the second last checkpoint. This is something I don't recommend doing. It made some of the berries unnecessarily hard when you debug back after you've already completed the section. If you play this and want to go for a full clear, do the berries as you're playing through the main path if you want to save some time later. Now for checkpoint number 2. This is the Forsaken City checkpoint, and it has zippers. Yeah, I don't have that much to say for this checkpoint actually, or for most of the earlier ones. The real interesting stuff happens in the final checkpoints. This one is just your standard zipper gameplay, so let's skip to checkpoint 3, the 1000 meter section. Now if this is supposed to be the chapter 2 old site segment of the map, you'd wonder what gimmick is used, considering dream blocks were already in the first checkpoint. Well, it's actually more dream blocks, but again a custom type of dream block. These ones are cassette dream blocks, meaning they turn on and off on a 4-tick cassette cycle like in Farewell. I was a bit worried at first about this section because I've never enjoyed playing with cassette blocks, especially when you have to tediously wait for them to switch before you input something. But the gameplay here flowed super well. You only really had to wait for the first cassette block, and the rest of the cycle would line up with your movements very nicely. Around the halfway mark you reach this point where you have 3 branching paths leading to 3 keys. Kind of reminds me of Water Bear Mountain, I don't know. I'm going to talk about this berry here, because it has a pretty creative gimmick to it. This berry is pretty much an entire speedrun section where you need to reach the end of each part before the cassette blocks switch and the solid balls suddenly become deadly lightning. Probably been done before somewhere, but it's unique to me and I quite like it. Same cannot be said for this berry though, ugh. It resembles a mural skies-esque array of moving dream blocks and moving coins, but it's all on a cassette cycle. It made me get a little internally pissed off, but I got it in the end. Least favorite room in the checkpoint though. Now for checkpoint 4, the resort checkpoint. While it has quite a lot of them, this checkpoint does have more to offer than just cycles. Mainly the dream crystal, which allows you to dash through solid blocks like you would through a dream block, and the what is this one called? I don't know. Demo crystal? That doesn't make sense. Immunity crystal? This one lets you dash through hazards which would have killed you normally, almost like you're demo dashing through a set of spinners. Oh, and of course there are cycles here for sure. While I did say I didn't enjoy waiting for cassette block cycles in gameplay, I actually really enjoy the Dust Bunny cycles, and especially how they're used here. I don't know, maybe it's a weird take, but cycles are overhated. Play more cycle maps. They're fun, I swear. In general, this was my favorite checkpoint up to this point. I found a lot of the rooms to play well, and the berries were all pretty creative. Oh yeah, the berries. When I mentioned that I debugged back to the berries after reaching the second last checkpoint, when I went back for the berries in 1500 meters was where I stumbled upon the issue. You see, halfway into the checkpoint you have a callback to the huge mess from Celestial Resort, where you flick switches that remove certain masses of blocks from the level. A lot of the berries relied on these handy blocks here, but if you debug back after you've collected all the switches, they'll be missing, making the berries much harder. For example, this one, which played pretty nicely normally, seemed impossible to do after having the blocks removed. I had to do this. And this. It was actually kind of fun finding routes to get the berries with the missing blocks, but if you're not into finding jank routes, I'd recommend getting the berries as you progress through the checkpoint. That concludes all I have to say for 1500 meters, so now on to 2000 meters. Tomato soup. This checkpoint adds corner boosts, and wind. Oh, and would you look at that, there's more dream blocks. Now they can move and stuff. The gameplay here starts to get noticeably harder, seeing as the map now makes you chain stuff like Dream Hypers and Ultras quicker than you would have been previously. But it was also my favorite checkpoint up to this point for that reason. The gameplay has gotten to somewhere around the high expert to low grandmaster difficulty range by this point. With that being said, it's also the point where jank and inconsistency starts to get more noticeable, which is pretty natural as the difficulty gets higher. Some parts feel like they could have had some refinement or further playtesting, but I won't hold it against the mapper too much because, well, the map already took long enough to make. It's simply not possible to remove every last bit of jank in any map. This has felt even more in 2500 meters and in general as the difficulty goes up. Now to give credit, I think 2500 meters manages to do some really creative stuff with the palette of gameplay objects it uses. It features dream blocks, no surprise there, a combination of modified swap blocks and vanilla swap blocks, and lastly reverse bubbles. The modified swap blocks are seen in like every custom map ever. They alternate positions with each dash rather than only moving to a single node per dash. And reverse bubbles are really overhated. These move you in the opposite way that you input. For example, holding left in a reverse bubble takes you right, and holding down left makes you go upright. Sure, it's annoying having your controls suddenly flipped on you, but people act like they ruin every Celeste map that they're added into. It's a pretty fun and interesting skill set to test, and plus once they get into your muscle memory, they function the same as any old bubble. All in all, even though I've mostly said positive stuff here, this was one of my least favorite checkpoints, purely on a personal level. The gameplay just didn't click for me, and I think there were enough awkward or unintuitive inputs here to make you get frustrated, but overall this checkpoint isn't the worst. With this checkpoint out the way, you're actually done with all strawberries in the map, so don't look too hard for secrets in the last few checkpoints. So here's where it gets interesting. Checkpoint 7, the 3000 meters part. Okay, right away, Gravity Helper. Gravity Helper is either really annoying to play or really fun, and in this case the map uses gravity switching in really awesome ways. Oh, and there's Calamity music? Calamity music was already used twice in this map, but Calamity music, you know? Okay, so the gameplay here is solidly like yellow to red Grandmaster difficulty, so having good gameplay design is even more important. And for the most part it's done well, but there are definitely a few minor gameplay choices that didn't feel all that good to play. Stuff like blocks not being in the right spot when they should be, or inputs that kill you even if you seem to have done everything correctly. Again, I won't hold it against the mapper too much because you can't remove all the jank in a map, but it's small stuff like this that adds up to making some parts of the room annoying to play. I should also mention the huge amount of cheese in this map. I didn't do any cheese personally, but quite a lot of rooms can be almost skipped entirely with strats. It's kind of funny actually.
I'm so sorry, Yosha.
Most of the cheese looks a lot less fun than the main path, so if you play this map, I would recommend staying away from the cheese routes as much as possible. Despite all I said that might have sounded negative, this was one of the coolest recreations of Summit 3000 meters I've seen and played. And like every good Summit map, it has to have a flag one that is marginally easier than every other flag. Are we done yet? No, we still haven't gotten to the GM+1 part. You know how in collabs you go through the 20 or so maps the lobby has to offer, and then you do a final hard side challenge that combines every map you've played into one? Checkpoint 8 of Mount Vesuvius is like the hard side of the entire map. It combines everything you've been through before into one last stretch. Each room here mixes in the gimmicks from 2 checkpoints that were seen earlier, like in the first room which has the wavy dream blocks from 0 meters and the zip movers from 500 meters. What's interesting is that the following rooms have one gimmick from the previous room and one gimmick from the following checkpoint, with the gimmick from the previous room being the latest most checkpoint from that room. This means that the final room has the objects from both the temple checkpoint and the gravity switches from 3000 meters, which makes for quite the finale to the map. But before we even get there, all the rooms prior to this are still really hard, with each room feeling a little harder than the previous. I've heard people say that this map has a steep difficulty curve, but I actually found the difficulty progression to feel pretty natural throughout the whole thing. Where this room took me an hour to beat, the previous one took me 40 minutes to beat. I don't know, this map's hard. Let's just go talk about final room, cause this will probably definitely be the room you spend the most amount of time on. This room does the funny hard list thing where it's longer than all the rooms that come before it. At least it's only double the length of the previous room and not any further. Do I think this room is fun? Yes, I actually think the entire room is fun as hell to play, with exception to one part, which is this here. I don't know if I was doing something wrong, but buffering the corner boost off the spring will almost never give you the height to make it up to the next block. The only way I found it to get consistent was by timing the corner boost after you've already collided with the block. Again, maybe I was doing something wrong, but this is like, not good. Most of my deaths were to this part just because of how absurd of a timing it was. Rest of the room is cool though. There's a random Dolce thrown in, cause why not? A really fun wall jump section here, and then you're onto the second half of the room. The gameplay cools down a bit here. There's reverse bubbles, but they're really not that bad once you learn them. Definitely the most evil part is this ending here. It goes for the 7C final room approach of removing any sort of gimmicks or tech for the end, and going all out with precise dashing and maneuvering. I don't remember any gravity switches in 7C though. I died here like 20 times or something. It's such a crazy ending, I love it. And after that, we're done. So, after this whole entire rant about this map, what do I truly think of it? Well, it's probably one of my favorite maps I've played. Yes, there are some minor problems with jank and such, but it's impossible to have a map that is completely free of that stuff, and it doesn't sour all of the amazing and creative parts of this map for me. 10 out of 10 enjoyment rating from me, and if you have the skill, I would highly suggest playing this map. Maybe you won't spend as long as I did. Anyways, good night, good afternoon, whatever.